Welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast, hosted by David Vigliotti and Vigliotti and Associates. We're here to talk with business owners and business experts to inspire and encourage entrepreneurs.
Hello, welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode. I've got one of my best friends in business here with me, Jeff Hancher, who started from a life of poverty, became a success at a massive company in leadership and sales, and parlayed that into starting his own business. So Jeff, we're excited to have you here on the Businesses Start Here podcast, and looking forward to talking with you.
Man, I'm excited to be here. I love everything that you're doing, Dave. You're helping a lot of people with your business, and not only has it been good to connect with you from a business standpoint, but get to know you. I think who you are is even more impressive than what you do. So I'm glad to be on the show.
Thanks, Jeff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? So you started from humble beginnings, worked up to the top basically at a massive company, and then took a massive leap from there to start your own business.
Yeah, man, it is quite a story for sure, and one that now I'm proud to tell because I think it can encourage some other people. I grew up here in southwestern Pennsylvania, rural America. I grew up with two very, very sick parents. As a matter of fact, they never worked a day in my life. I had a mom that suffered from a disease called lupus, and I had a dad that suffered from chronic osteoarthritis. And, as a young boy, I had an older brother, and, I always just remember dreaming with him and talking about, our best hope was to get into a good steel mill or a coal mine and make a run out of it and try to help our parents. Because they weren't working, we were a product of the system, and, we just wanted more. We wanted more not only for ourselves, but we also wanted more for them. I ended up going into the military. I'm a veteran of the United States Army. I'd love to tell you it's because I wanted to serve the grand old flag, but the reality was I was running from something, not to something. But it made me a man, as they say, and I transitioned out of the military, and I was on my way heading to college, and I got the call that I'd gotten so many times from my dad, which was they're sending mom home in hospice. And he had asked me to put college on the back burner because at this very time, the reason he couldn't help was he was having his leg amputated. Wow. And so I didn't want to be a burden on them financially, so literally I answered a newspaper article for a route delivery job out of Bridgeville, Pennsylvania. And in September of 1996, I started my career with Cintas Corporation. Started out as a fill-in on the trucks, and after 23 and a half years, I was able to go up to a pretty high level of leadership in that Fortune 500 company. But within the last couple of years, as you know, Dave, I had an itch that could no longer be scratched, and this was a much different story. I was running to something and not from something. I had a great career with a company I loved, but I had this passion of building a business that could serve others, other business leaders, other business entrepreneurs that maybe were missing some pieces. And I'm really dedicating the rest of my life to reaching back and helping others win.
That's great. I love hearing your story. I've heard it, I don't know how many times, but
Yeah.
Hearing where you came from, it's not often that people take that as a motivator.
Yeah.
It's really hard to because you don't see a lot of examples. People don't usually talk about the difficulties they ran into. So you being here and using your platform and everything you're doing on social media with your business and being open about where you came from is great.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I used to hide the story.
Yeah.
When you're trying to build a brand in a large corporation and you see your upbringing as they're going to create a bias.
Right.
They're going to, it's that imposter syndrome, right? Like, should I be in this room? Do they know where I'm from? Do they know I grew up in poverty?
I would say that imposter syndrome, everybody has it.
To a point,
Right.
Yeah. It was chronic for me. I remember being in the big rooms and they're like, tell us where you went to college, and I always found myself on a bathroom break at that point because I would hide it. But here's what I realized. There's some young Jeff Hanchers out there. There's some young men and women out there that maybe have an upbringing like I do. I want them to hear my story. I want them to know that they can do it too.
Yeah.
And whether you're young or old, and you have vision, you have goals, you have a dream, I really think there's key things that you can do in your life to get from where you are to where you want to go. Because what I have found to be true, it doesn't matter where you came from.
Right.
It matters where you're going. You can't always control where you came from, but we can all control what the rest of it looks like.
Right.
And that's what I'm passionate about talking about, and I think there's key principles that can help you get there.
Yeah, so speaking of that, you went from no experience, you were on a truck. How did you grow into these increasingly more senior positions?
Yeah, great question. It's a lot of blood and sweat and definitely some tears. And hard work's a big part of it. But, I always tell people that, there's things that you're going to have to be willing to give up. But I've gotten the question enough over my corporate career and even now in my business that I've dedicated a lot of time thinking about what were those things that maybe I did different to get me there. And I've really boiled it down to three things. The first thing is be accountable. Be accountable. Now you might be saying, thank you, Mr. Obvious, for that nugget. Like, okay, we know that. But when you really think of the essence of accountability is not only being accountable to you, but it's being accountable to the people that are counting on you to win. Who is that? And accountability, although it's easy to talk about and everybody would agree it's important, not everybody does it. If you think about these companies that people work at, everybody's given the same playbook, but not everybody performs the same way. Yeah. Accountability is consuming what you need to consume more than everybody else to get what nobody else has. And I boil it down, I talk a lot about the 4 camps. Camp 1 is, I hope it doesn't come up. Camp 2 is, if it comes up, I'll wing it. Camp 3 is, if it comes up, I'm ready to talk about it. But then there's Camp 4, and Camp 4 is, if it doesn't come up, I'm bringing it up. Right. If we want to be truly accountable and we're serious about where we want to go, we have to live in Camp 4. Camp 4 requires some pain, some sacrifice, getting information in you that nobody else has. If you know CPR and you see somebody laying lifeless on the ground, you don't wait, you go. Why? Because you have an answer to somebody's biggest problem. You're not waiting for somebody else. You in that moment are in Camp 4. If we were to survey, Dave, 100 people off the street and ask them, do you have a dream? They'd all have one. The problem's not the dream, it's the people that only dream and don't take action. Yeah. The second thing would be continuous improvement.
Can I back you up
one second
on accountability? One thing I want to say is that's difficult for business owners. Because when you own the business, who are you accountable to? You don't have a boss anymore, but you are accountable to your clients and your employees if you have any. So I think that's probably one area where I've seen the most struggle with, and that's where people bring in someone like you as a coach, because there is nobody. When someone says, let me speak to your boss, and you are the boss, you can't act the same way that an employee would. You have to be held to a higher standard and be accountable for every single thing that you do, say, and even think.
It's so true, Dave. Stephen Covey said it best when he said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Right. And sometimes we do get this ego as business owners, especially the small to medium size. We're the king of the kingdom, the queen of the whatever. And we do fall into that trap. But here's what we also know is true. You should always be getting around people that have been where you want to go. Right. And as an entrepreneur or a business owner, you have to be intentional of finding that accountability, because most times you're not going to get it in its truest form within your organization. Right. And that's where I do spend a lot of my time holding others accountable. But true accountability comes from within. Right. For me, it was, I didn't want my kids to live the same life I lived. I didn't want my parents to suffer anymore, living paycheck to paycheck and not being able to afford the best medical care. And that's true accountability. That's like Simon Sinek says, attaching it to your why. Right. You'll work for your what, you'll die for your why. That's true accountability, because then it's no longer about you letting yourself down. You're letting the people you care most about down. When you internalize that, it changes the game.
This is a little off topic, but when you talk about why, and I think a lot of people get into business and they don't really know why. Yeah. Do you have any advice on how someone can identify what their why actually is? And if it's money, it's probably a problem.
It probably is a problem. Yeah, don't get in business for the money. Get in business to make a difference and find a need. I always say that if you're a great pie maker, that doesn't make you a pie making business. Right. That makes you a good pie maker. Right. You need people like Dave around you to help get you there. You need sales strategies. You need all of these things. It does always start with an idea, so I'm not deterring you from pushing towards that, but there's a lot of glamour in starting your own business. But as you and I know, and probably a lot of your listeners know, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, and everybody wants the American dream until the work begins. Right. And so yes, it does start with a plan, but you do need people speaking into you. You know, why would you start a business? Here's what I would tell you. First and foremost, what problem are you solving?
Yep.
And how well can you solve that problem? Who do you have in your inner circle that's truly going to run the race with you? And what are the things that you're not thinking about? Your organization does a great job walking people through that process. It was very helpful to me. You know, there's a lot of things we don't think about that your company lays out well for people. So that would be a big piece of advice I would give, is go through those steps in that plan. Because often what we think is, you know, everybody says, I'll make the best apple pie in the world. Right. You know what I should do? Start an apple pie making business. Slow your roll. Like, right. You need to really think about what all is involved. Because if not, you begin resenting making apple pie. Yep. So you got to think holistically around it. The first thing is, what problem are you solving? The second thing is, become a third shift entrepreneur. Don't quit your day job. Yeah. Do this on third shift and start small and test the market, and then show incremental scaling improvement.
Yeah, that's big. I think a lot of people think you're just going to make this massive jump, right? You're going to be working at a Fortune 500 company one day and have this business tomorrow, and it's going to go from $0 in revenue to $100,000 in the first year.
Yeah.
That's very rarely what happens. You need a lot of funding to get there. I mean, if you don't have 3 years worth of expenses in the bank and you're starting with $0, you're probably not going to make it.
Yeah, it's scary. It's a scary venture for sure.
So back to, so you were on accountability.
Yeah, the second one would be continuous improvement. And again, this might be a Mr. Obvious. Things are easy to talk about, but then there's the execution. You've probably heard me say it, Dave, that if you want things you've never had, you better be prepared to do things you've never done. A few times. It's so true. Back to the dream. The dream's not the problem. What are you willing to give in return for what you want? And most people aren't willing to do that. It's the age-old saying of, be willing to give up what you want now for what you want most. Everybody wants happy hour. Everybody wants to cut out early on Friday. Everybody wants the Saturday off. But what are you truly willing to give to get? Yeah. And it reminds me of boxing. I started boxing as a teenager for no other reason than I could legally punch people, and I was an unruly child, and my uncle introduced me to the sport. And I show up the first time, and I was a bruiser. I was always getting in trouble, and I walked in that gym really to prove something on my first day. And I could tell, like, my trainer saw it all over me, and he wanted to send an early message. So he puts me with this other guy, and he tells the guy's name was John. He said, John, I want you to drop this on Jeff's stomach 20 times. Jeff, I want you to count out loud so I can hear it. And so, no problem. 18, 19, 20, I get up, no problem, shake it off, and my trainer comes over and he says, hey, what are you doing? And I said, well, you told me to count out loud 20 times. And this is where the real catch happened. He said, oh, my mistake, son. I didn't want you to start counting until you started feeling pain. And he knew exactly what he was doing, right? But he said this, the next thing that he said has stuck with me to this day. He said, Jeff, you're going to have to understand something. You're either going to sweat in this gym or you're going to bleed in the ring on fight night. Either way, you're going to pay. And I say, if we're going to pay and there's going to be pain, let's do it in this gym. Yeah. And with that, I got back down on the floor and I didn't start counting until my gut started feeling pain. Yeah. And isn't that a lot like life? Yeah. We want to do as little as possible for the biggest reward. That's really not how it works. And I'm not saying forget about work-life balance and all this. Find balance, but there's no free lunch. Right. If you want something different, you got to move different. You got to act different. You got to be willing. What are you doing to get better? In your business, it's understanding tax laws, accounting laws, whatever it might be. What makes you so special? That should be the question we're asking. Because if you're blending in and doing what everybody else does, you're going to get what everybody else has. Right. And then the third thing is engage your motivation. And I would tell you, out of the three, this has been the biggest for me. It's those moments that you remember and remind yourself why you're doing this. Why is this important? Why am I willing to give so much? We've heard these stories of these moms that pull cars off of kids that are trapped underneath. Right. It's like crazy. True stories. How do they do that? It's humanly impossible until you engage your motivation. Right. If they had a ball stuck under that car, there's no chance they could lift that car. Yeah. but something under there was attached to what they cared about. When you engage that, it changes the game. For me, I remember quitting on a sales class. I wanted to be in sales. I'm a blue-collar truck driver, wanted to be in sales. I show up to the first class, and I was a fish out of water. They talked different, they looked different, and I knew I was from the other side of the tracks. And I had invested a lot.
Too.
Yeah, they probably knew too, exactly. I'm driving across the Fort Pitt Bridge, and I'm like, I'm never going back there. They can keep the money, non-refundable, don't care. I was embarrassed. It killed my ego, killed my pride. And that's when I settled on the fact of I've reached the pinnacle. And you know what, life's not so bad anyway. You know, I tried.
Yeah.
But then as I'm passing, it was probably around the Bridgeville exit, I remembered in 3rd grade being in the welfare office with my dad when he broke down because they denied him food stamps once again. And I'm flashing back to all these moments in hospitals, all these moments watching my parents be sick, all these moments of arguments and fights about money and all of this stuff. And I settled in my mind that wasn't going to be me. And I'm going back. Yeah. And I got the trainer, I got a mentor that helped me through it. And I ended up winning the presenter of the Dale Carnegie class, and it promoted me into a sales role. It would have been easy to quit in that moment, but I engaged the motivation. Jeff Hancher didn't want to go through that pain. Right. And I would tell your listener this, there's going to be a lot of things you don't want to do, but what are you willing to do? Right. Because at some point you got to realize it's not about you. There's people counting on you to win. Don't let the team down. So those would be the 3 things: accountability, continuous improvement, and engaging your motivation.
So thinking about the Dale Carnegie story, the thing that came to mind was good is the enemy of great.
Yes.
Right? So like you had a decent life.
Yeah.
But you knew where you came from. So I think a lot of times that's the biggest hurdle people have to overcome. Maybe you have a decent job and you want to start a business, but you're comfortable.
Yes.
Right. So
yes.
I think maybe starting a business isn't for you, but is it? If it is, you need to get out of that comfort zone and start that 3rd shift entrepreneur. Start working, yes. Seeing if it's a viable business, and then if it is, then at some point you do take that leap. But I think good is the enemy of great can stop people before they even start at times.
So well said, Dave. It's a tremendous point. You know, comfort is the enemy of growth. Yeah. It's in the discomfort that true growth happens, right? And if you think about that scenario and what you're saying, for me, when I was ready to quit that sales class, I had a brand new truck, a Chevy S10. This thing was a peach. We had never had new cars growing up. One of my chores was to cut tin pieces out of coffee cans and pop rivet them to the floors of our car. Like, we never had that. I was getting paid $400 a week, and I had a 401k and benefits. Yeah. That was unheard of. Right. I was living large. So what if I don't get the sales job? I'm better than I ever thought I would be. Yeah. And that's what we call settling. And people ask me often, like, what are some things that you would do different if you could go back? One of those things is I would have dreamed bigger. If you would have told me that I was going to be a senior leader in a Fortune 500 company from a truck driver, I would have told you were out of your mind. Yeah. I would have dreamed bigger because it propels you. So write down your goals. Dream big. Dream bigger than you think it's possible, because it'll help push you towards that. But you're absolutely right. Don't settle for being better than you were, because being better than you were is nothing to celebrate. Right. Chasing your potential is really what we're after. We're not trying to be better than the next guy. Right. You can be the best in the room, but you might perhaps be the cream of the crop. Right. And that's nothing to celebrate. Go chase your potential.
Yeah, I think it's important. Potential people don't talk about very often.
Right.
You hear comparing yourself, like you said,
yes.
to someone else in the room, comparing yourself to where you were. And I saw something once that said, I may not be where I need to be yet, but I'm better than I was yesterday. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's not something to celebrate, but it is a part of the process. So I think it's important to make sure that you're continuing to improve. Like you said, continuous improvement.
That's it.
And don't get discouraged that you're not where your potential is, but also don't be comfortable with where you are because you're maybe 10 steps ahead of where you started, but you've got 100 steps to go.
Yeah, we're not saying that you have to take major chunks out of progress. We're just saying always be improving. You know, it's like the saying of the person crawling will lap the person on the couch.
Right.
It's true.
Yeah.
Don't quit. Find small ways to incrementally get better, and the compounding effect of that is staggering. Yeah. And most people aren't willing to.
Yeah, and one thing I've heard that kind of puts a good point on this is it's better to do one thing correct 100 times than do 100 different things correct one time.
Yes.
Consistent, so continuous improvement, not just once a year you go to the training. It's every day, every week, whatever that schedule is for you.
And that's a mindset, Dave. Yeah. That's a champion mindset. There's a difference between practicing to get it right and practicing to never get it wrong.
Right.
Most people would say, if I practice to get it right, that's pretty good, because I'm doing more than most people would.
Right.
But practicing to never get it wrong, that's a champion mindset.
Right.
I can't get it wrong. The muscle memory is so strong, I couldn't get it wrong if I tried. Right. That's what makes elite athletes, elite business people. That's what makes champions. That's a different mindset.
Something really interesting, kind of on topic, but I watched this YouTube channel called Smarter Every Day. He built a bike where if you turn the wheel left, turn the handlebar left, you went right.
Oh my gosh.
And the opposite, obviously. So it's almost like he could not ride that bike because he had spent so much time in his life riding a bike the right way.
Yes.
And you take one thing and do it the opposite. Because he had continuously improved his bike riding skills, he couldn't get it wrong, so he fell. because there was that massive kink in the armor. So I think that's an interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah. It's making me think about the journey I'm on right now. Yeah. You know, I could have stayed at corporate America, climbed a couple more spots, probably retired earlier than most, but I had to go do this with a ton of fear, a ton of unknown. Didn't know a pandemic was literally right around the corner, all this stuff.
3 months later.
And you know, quite frankly, better than anybody, the challenges that I have as an entrepreneur. But I'm settling on what I'm great at, and I'm getting great people around me. But it's like what you're saying about this bike. Like, I have felt like that more days than I care to tell you about. Like, learning QuickBooks and finances and scheduling and all this stuff. It's been a learning curve. Yeah. But you got to show incremental improvement. I got a long way to go, but man, I got to tell you, I'm loving the ride.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you stepped out of this large corporation, very high up, to start your business. Mm-hmm. What led you to do that?
Man, this is going to sound like a Hallmark movie response. It really is, but I can't be more real when I tell you that the gratitude that I have for where I am is I can't even put it into words. You know, I've been blessed. I've been really blessed. And you know, I look at the opportunities I've been given. You know, obviously I'm a man of faith, and I believe God moves in amazing ways. But there have been people that have been put in my life as well that have made huge deposits in me and literally changed the course of my life. I want to be that person for as many people as I can impact. I truly, you know, at the end of my life, I want people to be sad that I'm gone and happy that I was here. Yeah. And I want to make that real impact. And why? I'm very passionate about leadership. John Maxwell says it often, that everything rises and falls at the hand of a leader. And you're not going to talk me out of that. Like there's no question about it. You can have the best widget, the best process, the best service, whatever it might be. But it's no different than if you had a Lamborghini sitting in your driveway without an engine. Right. It looks great. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. Adversely, you could have an average product and average service with great leadership and thrive in a marketplace. Leadership is so important. Leadership genuinely not only changes business cultures, it can literally change a generation. It can change a world. And that's what I want to be on the forefront of doing. I believe it's important. I believe we get it wrong a lot. You know, I believe there's a lot of missing steps to effective leadership development. Yeah. And I think what we think oftentimes is leader means org chart, right, and leader means title. And we know that there's nothing further from the truth. And quite frankly, there's a lot of successful businesses out there that aren't being led well. And there's a lot of potential. There's also those new entrepreneurs that have a great idea that have never led anything. Right. I want to be the catalyst that helps, you know, pull some of them gaps in tightens up some of those gaps, fills some of those gaps to help leaders and businesses reach their fullest potential. So I want to reach back and serve, and I find no greater fulfillment in doing that.
That's great. So that's your why, right? So
That
we
is
talked
it.
about that. So your why is to take someone who was in a situation like you were and help them achieve their goals.
It is. And I will tell you, I've been at it now, December, it'll be 2 years. People ask me this all the time. Are you glad you did it? I can't even put into words how glad I am. And the fulfilling side of it, the legacy side of it, the funeral home test, are you going to be happy on your deathbed? No question about it. I will pass on into eternity a very happy man. I love what I'm doing. And I have had the question a lot, well, why would you do this? This is such a big space. And, look at all the YouTube videos are out there and all the podcasts on leadership. There's not anything new under the sun. There's some truth to that. There's a leadership book on every shelf in every home in America almost. But here's the reality. Leadership is one of these things that's better caught than it is taught. You can't go read a golf book that Tiger wrote and go play like Tiger. You got to get around Tiger. You got to be in the presence of greatness. And I'm not here to tell you like I'm the all-knowing, all-being great leadership guru. But here's what I do know. I can help a lot of people. And when you get around people, like I said earlier, that have been where you want to go, that's where true mentoring happens. That's where true personal development happens. That's where true culture change happens. And that's the spot, that's the chair that I want to sit in, is I want to be that person for other people. Because reading a book doesn't make you a great leader any more than being in a garage makes you a great master mechanic.
Right. Yeah,
you got to take action.
Even this morning, like I hear you talk all the time. I read leadership books, but we had an issue that I wouldn't have been able to solve that issue myself. It was talking to you, sharing with you, getting your experience, your feedback, puts me in position now where I have the tools I need to do that. Like you said, just reading a book doesn't get to the nuances. Every situation is different.
Yeah.
I mean, a book can give you principles, but to be able to act on those principles, sometimes you need someone that's done it.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
To put it in real, because there will be people listening to this that say, I'm good, we don't need all that. If you think about a child that you're trying to teach how to tie their shoes, and you hand them a pamphlet and say, this will tell you everything. Good luck.
Right.
Like, assuming they even know how to read, but let's just say that it's pictures or whatever. And you say, hey, today's the day you're going to learn how to tie your shoes. And you pass over the pamphlet. There's no chance, or a fat chance, that's going to work out well. That's not what you do as a parent. You sit down and you show them how to do it. They observe. Then you watch them do it. And you coach and you redirect. And they throw a temper tantrum and they're mad and their shoes are on the wrong feet and they're a mess. Right. And that's in the moment you're like, should we just go to Velcro? But the reality is, that child needs to know how to tie their shoes. Yeah. And so you keep pushing through that. But as they watch you learn how to tie the shoes, watch you do it, see you do it, now in your mind as the parent, you're saying, how come they're not getting this? Right. How come? You've been there before. It's not that big of a deal for you. Right. And that's a small example, but in business, it's the same thing. I have people call me all the time with challenges. Like, oh my gosh, I don't know if we're going to go to a B2B sales force, or, this guy's a bad culture fit, but he's been here 20 years and they're rattled and they're ready to jump off of a bridge. And I'm like, this is no problem. I've been through that like 100 times. I got the calluses to show for it. And then I can help them walk through that difficult time. Yeah. That's the value that I want to bring to the world.
I think it's funny because I feel that way at times. So the imposter syndrome, kind of getting back to that. Because you're an expert at something, sometimes you don't realize how expert you are at it, right? Until you talk to somebody who has absolutely no clue.
Right.
So you start to question, even as a business owner, if you're a service provider, the value that you're providing. Mm-hmm. And then you have someone ask a question that's so elementary to you that you're like, you start to realize, I am an expert in this area.
Yeah, back to Camp 4. Like, right. You realize, man, I'm in Camp 4 a lot right. in this one area, whatever it might be. Those are all indicators that you're probably going the right way.
Yeah. So leadership is is your main area of focus. So can you give some advice for some of the business owners or potential business owners watching and listening on how to find people that they can lead and that they can grow into other leaders to replicate themselves and to continue to expand their business?
Yeah, I mean, it'll vary by business, depending on how technical and aptitude driven and all that stuff. If you're building atom bombs in your business, you're going to need skill to do that, right? But I'm a big fan of hire for culture, train for skill. Culture's big. Matter of fact, there's no close second. Building culture is very, very important for any organization. And so you should have a good leadership development program. This is how you get leaders internally, but you should also be pulling from the outside. This helps stir up any stagnant water. I would tell you if there's a lot of things that make up for good culture and great businesses, right? But if I were to give advice to anybody of where should I start first, I would tell you start with your hiring process. Because whoever you have currently on the team is who you have. Right. Yes, I coach people on how to weed out the C player and how to make the A player even better and more well-rounded, and would do all that. But you want to stop any bleeding that there might be with hiring great people. Most people, when they go to hire, Dave, they're hiring for skill. Right. Can they do the job? Do they have the aptitude? You need to do that, but not for the sake of culture. And so I talk leaders and hiring managers through a series of questions that they need to ask that force somebody to answer with who they are, not just what they do. Right. And so many times we'll ask questions like, are you a hard worker? I've never met anybody that wasn't, right? And so we have to guide people and train people through the hiring process. Once we get that shored up, then we go internally. We build leadership development programs and the all-knowing, all-being, weeding the bad people out. Ironically, Dave, I will tell you, top leadership setback, accountability and challenging leadership, followed by number 2, emotional intelligence. I spend a lot of my time helping organizations have the tough conversations, create the performance plans, and coach people out of the organizations that don't need to be there.
Do you find that as you improve your hiring process, even the current players either kind of lift themselves up or realize that the culture has changed and they don't fit as well and tend to weed themselves out?
100%. That's the beauty of a great culture. And here's an example that every listener can hear. Have you ever jumped, think back when you were a teenager and you jumped in your buddy's car and there were 500 McDonald's cups there? If you had a McDonald's cup, where would you put it?
Right on the floor.
Right on the floor. If you jumped in your buddy's car and it was shining with Armor All, it smelled good, there was a great air freshener, and you just got done eating a bag of McDonald's and was finished, what would you do with it?
I hold on to that thing for dear life.
Yeah, there's no way, because the atmosphere has been created, and you will adapt yourself to the atmosphere. It's the same way with a tidy home, whatever it might be. Cultures work that way. Yeah. And the beauty of great cultures is, when you build a great culture, you can literally have average leaders, because the culture will help run the effectiveness of your company from a character and efficiency standpoint. And so, yes, it will weed them out. It will, because the great thing about great culture is we're going to make bad hires. When we're 100% sure, we're going to be about 60% right. But when you have a great internal culture and you do make that bad hire, they can't last. They just can't last because it's uncomfortable. You have employees saying, oh, you don't want to do that. That would be a bad idea. They're leading for you. The culture is your biggest leadership advocate. And so absolutely it will weed out bad culture.
So starting at the beginning, culture trumps over everything. Like you said, you can train skill in most areas. Some areas there's no ability for that, but you need to find, if you have an average person that's a great culture fit versus an above average person that's not a culture fit, you would recommend going with that average person.
It's the biggest miss. And yes, absolutely. Yeah. We call these the A players, the peak performers. Everybody has, a lot of people have that salesperson on their team that brings in, 40% of their gross revenue of the company. And oftentimes they're your biggest problem. And there's no accountability and there's no boundaries and they get special treatment. Now I'm all about preferential treatment for peak performers, and I don't apologize about that. They deserve it. Right. However, not at the sake of culture, not at the sake of honor, not at the sake of these kind of things. Because if you do that, yes, you might lose an A player bringing in 40% of the revenue, but guess what else you're losing if you tolerate it? The other 60% that's watching, how is he going to handle, how is she going to handle this poor culture fit that's an A player? If you set the tone with A players, I promise you, the B players and C players are toeing the line.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying lead with the stick. Matter of fact, I'm saying don't lead with the stick. But you got to find a balance between motivational leadership and challenging leadership. If you're too passive, you're going to get steamrolled. If you're too aggressive, you're going to get compliance and lack engagement. You got to fall into assertiveness regardless of how they're performing.
Yeah, so speaking of A players, so I've heard you talk about this before, and as much as I can't stand them because they're the Patriots, the quintessential model of this is Bill Belichick.
It sure is.
Like Tom Brady was treated no differently, and that might be part of why he left, but he was treated no differently than the guy we went to high school with was on their practice squad. He got the exact same treatment as Tom Brady did.
Yeah, and I'm sure Tom got some preferential treatment, right? But at the end of the day, it's culture. Yeah. We've seen that with the Steelers. Yeah. You know, you look no further than like Santonio Holmes. I'm calling him out right here on the show, right? Antonio Brown. But you can go down the list, and it's like the culture's too strong to allow for that.
We'll be sure to tag those guys.
Yeah, we'll tag them in it. Exactly. See if we can get a rise out of those guys. They're doing fine.
So anything else you want to talk about? I know you've got the Champion Forum is your podcast. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, Champion Forum podcast. You know, if you all things leadership there, you can go to my website, jeffhancher.com. I'd love to engage with people on socials. I love answering DMs. So hit me up on Instagram, jeff.hancher, LinkedIn under my name, Jeff Hancher, like Jolly Rancher, but with an H. And I'd love to connect with you. You can go to my website. You can sign up for our newsletter. You get free nuggets in there every single week. We have the great leadership development courses. You're a part of one of those. Love to have you in those leadership development groups. Remember what I said, leadership's better caught than it is taught. That's the heartbeat behind these groups. So love to have you in there for a couple months. Check it out at no cost. See if it's of value to your listener, and see what we could do to lock arms and support them any way that I can.
Yeah, and a plug for those groups. They are awesome. I'm in the executive mastermind group, and having those people to bounce ideas off of, we spend a chunk of the time talking about issues we might be having or best practices that we found. We don't always leave a lot of time for Jeff to talk, actually.
Right, exactly. That's how I like it.
Yeah, so it's good because, again, the accountability thing. When you own a business, it can be lonely at the top.
Yes.
And you can't talk to your employees about some of the issues you're having because you're employees.
Yes.
So having people at that level that are experiencing the same things as you, I say this all the time, like even my wife, who is pretty involved in the business, doesn't understand what we go through on a daily basis.
Sure, you're in the trench.
So having someone, either a business owner or an executive of some kind, that's at the top of their org chart to bounce ideas off of it is great. And then the leadership development group is great as well, because it has, again, it's people kind of banded with you at the same level, so you can bounce ideas off of and just have a nice community.
I love that community, and I really want to encourage anybody to kick the tires, come in for a couple months on me, see if it's a fit for you. I'd love to have you. Yeah,
and then we'll put a coupon code in the notes for this.
There we go. Let's do it.
Since I'm the one that manages that.
That's right. Let's do it. Let's do it. I'd love to have more people in it.
All right.
If it were up to me, Dave, and I didn't have a great account like you, there'd be like 100 people in there for free. So we gotta keep the main thing. But yeah, I'd love to have more people in there and make as much impact as I can make. So thanks for having me on today. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think the listeners got a lot out of it. And I learned some new things, even though I hear you talk multiple times a week.
There's all kind of layers there, Dave. Right. All kind of layers.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Businesses Start Here podcast. We hope you were inspired and encouraged by today's podcast. We would love to hear your feedback. Please send us an email at podcast@villiotti.com. That's podcast@villiotti.com. And be sure to share, like, and comment all of our content.